We're joined by Russ Diabo. He's a longtime critic of the AFN and a former candidate for National Chief, and was working for former National Chief RoseAnne Archibald when she was ousted earlier this year. Russ, good to see you. Thanks for taking some time for us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get going, we're going to run some of your concession speech from 2018 when you ran for National Chief of the AFN.
Okay.
This organization is basically controlled by the Trudeau government. And I'm saying to the people who are watching, it's really up to you now, because it's clear that this organization is not going to reform itself. It's going to have to happen from the outside. And I'm not going anywhere, so I'm going to be working to help reform the organization, and also still stopping the Trudeau legislation in a different role, but I still intend to fight to do that.
Russ, again there, your concession speech from when you ran for AFN National Chief. You didn't have a lot of faith in the AFN then, although you did previously work for National Chief RoseAnne Archibald. Have your thoughts on the organization changed at all?
No, if anything, what I said in 2018 has come to pass. We've seen the Trudeau government pass legislation through the AFN Canada bilateral agreement that sets up what they call this bilateral mechanism, this committee, this process. They passed the Indigenous Languages Act, the Indigenous Child and Family Services Act. They passed Bill C-97, which dissolved the Department of Indian Affairs and created the two new departments, the Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, and the United Nations Declaration Act, Bill C-15, which I was publicly opposing. But that's gone ahead and passed, and now there's an action plan. So, you know, First Nation peoples have three things to deal with. They have the UN Declaration itself, the UN Declaration Act, which has flaws in it, it's in the act itself, and now this action plan. So there's three moving parts now to the Trudeau government saying they're implementing the UN Declaration.
Russ, you know, turning ahead to this election, what are your thoughts on the 6 candidates that are running, and do you see any front runners?
I think probably the front runners are probably Cindy Woodhouse and Dean Sayers. And the way that the AFN elections have gone since 1985 under the AFN Charter, the BC Chiefs have a large block with, you know, like 200 potential votes. They're not running a candidate this time, so they'll have to decide basically who they're going to be the kingmakers for, right?
Mm-hmm. So no matter who's elected, I guess, Russ, who do you see, or what do you see as the tasks and the challenges ahead for the next National Chief?
Well, you know, whoever wins the AFN election is going to have to deal with the problems with that AFN Canada bilateral process, because that's the process that's managing regional and national issues across Canada. And all of the resolutions I've seen before this assembly, I think there's like 90 resolutions. A lot of them have to do with program and service issues and additional funding, all of which will be put to the senior officials table, made up of the AFN directors on one side and the associate deputy ministers and director generals of the departments of Crown Indigenous Relations and Indigenous Services Canada and the Department of Justice. And then they'll kick it up, if it's a political decision, they'll kick it up to the political leaders between the AFN Executive Committee, the National Chief, and the ministers, and ultimately the Prime Minister. That's the structure they put in place. So, you know, really it's the federal government that's managing and controlling that process, and of course the funding. So there was problems with that. National Chief Archibald was trying to renegotiate that agreement through a Healing Path Forward Accord, but the Chiefs didn't support that, and the executive didn't support that. But problems with that process still remain, and they haven't been addressed.
Well, Russ, it will be a couple of interesting days here. I'm sure you'll be watching as closely as us. Appreciate you sharing some of your insight with us.
Thank you very much for having me.